They say death was mercy on the battlefield. But for the wives of the fallen, the true horror began after the swords fell silent, on the gray mists of the North Sea, where the wind carried the scent of salt and iron. The age of the Vikings was not just an era of conquest, it was a world built upon fear, fate, and fire. The clang of their blades echoed across kingdoms, but what they left behind was more than ruins. It was a silence heavier than mourning, a silence that swallowed the cries of those who lived through defeat. When the warriors fell and their homes were taken, the fate of their wives was not one of pity, nor even of ransom. It was transformation, a cruel rewriting of existence under the law of the victors. The Norse world was bound by a code, one older than parchment and harsher than steel. To them, the conquered did not merely lose land, they lost honor, lineage, and name. And in that world, a woman was often seen not as an individual, but as an extension of her husband's fate. When the men of a village perished, their wives were not spared. They were taken, their value repurposed, their dignity remolded by the savage traditions of the victors. Yet even in that brutality lay the cold logic of the Viking creed, to erase one legacy and forge another from its ashes. It began the moment the smoke of burning halls drifted into the dawn sky. The victors, broad-shouldered, blood-stained, their eyes as cold as fjord ice, moved through the wreckage, claiming what was left of the world they had destroyed: gold, livestock, tools, and then the wives. These women, who once held power within their households, suddenly found themselves standing in the shadow of those who had slain their kin. To the Vikings, this was not savagery. It was spoils of war, sanctioned by their gods. Odin and Freya demanded the strong to take, to rule, to reshape the weak. But the true cruelty was not always in the act, it was in what came after. In Norse culture, a woman taken in war faced one of two fates. Some were absorbed into the victor's household, renamed and forced to serve as bondmaids, domestic slaves, bound by the laws of ownership. Others were parceled as bride spoils, a grim practice where they were forced to wed the very men who had burned their homes. It was not love nor lust, it was conquest extended through the bloodline, a way to fuse enemy and victor into one household. For the Viking, this meant power. For the woman, it meant the death of identity. Her husband's memory became forbidden, her past erased under the name of her captor. But worse than enslavement was something subtler: the psychological shattering. Imagine the silence after the screams, when the raiders' ships have left the shore and the conquered settlement is nothing but smoldering beams. A woman who survived such a day carried ghosts that no one saw. She became a living token of defeat, her every glance a reminder of her people's failure. Some chose to end their lives by their own hand rather than live under the rule of the invaders. Others endured, becoming shadows in their new homes, learning the language of their captors, bearing their children, yet forever haunted by the lives they lost. There are chronicles, half-whispered by monks and traders, of villages that simply vanished after a Viking raid. Not because all were slain, but because those left behind chose to burn what remained, choosing death and ruin over bondage. In such times, the fate of women was bound not by choice but by the will of the gods, or so they were told. Even within Norse mythology, this idea of conquest and dominance was divine. The goddess Freya herself, though revered for love and fertility, was also patron of battle, spoils receiving half of all warriors slain in combat. To the Viking mind, this was cosmic order: men to Valhalla, women to the victors. And yet, beneath the cruelty of it all, there were rare moments of rebellion, stories that the sagas tried to bury. Tales of wives who refused to kneel, who slew their captors in the night and fled into the forests, surviving on berries and frost. Some became legends whispered across the coasts, spirits of vengeance that haunted the dreams of warriors who thought themselves gods. The Vikings believed in fate, but even fate could tremble before the wrath of the wronged. But for most, resistance was crushed by time and necessity. A woman who survived became part of her captor's world, sometimes even rising in status if she bore sons who proved strong. And in this cruel cycle, the victors justified their sins as destiny. They believed the gods had written it, so the strong must rule, the weak must serve. In that belief lay the darkest truth of the Viking world. The cruelty was not born of madness, but of faith. As winter fell upon the northern seas, and the longhouses glowed with firelight, these women, once proud wives of warriors, sat beside the hearths of their enemies, tending to their children, staring into the flames that mirrored the ones that had taken their homes. They spoke little, for memory was a dangerous thing. To remember was to ache. To ache was to break, and in the eyes of the victors, a broken soul was easier to command than a free one. But not all broke. Some waited, some learned, and some would rise when the time came, turning the tools of servitude into weapons of vengeance. There is a silence deeper than grief, the silence that follows, when the world no longer remembers your name. When the dust of conquest settled, the Viking warbands returned to their strongholds with their spoils, gold, livestock, and the living remnants of another people. The wives of the defeated warriors were not written into sagas, for the Norse chroniclers did not sing songs of the conquered. Yet their lives, hidden between the lines of ancient texts, tell a truth that even the skalds feared to speak. For these women did not merely lose their homes, they lost the very fabric of who they were. In the cold north, survival demanded more than strength. It demanded obedience. The captured were taken not to prisons, but to halls of warmth, places where laughter and fire masked the quiet humiliation of servitude. They worked beside those who destroyed everything they loved, learning the customs of their captors. The sounds of a new tongue that tasted of both ash and command. Each day they performed tasks once done for their own kin, but now for strangers who saw them as the remnants of a conquered world. And yet, the Vikings were not mindless brutes. Their cruelty was bound in structure, justified through belief. The Norse gods themselves were conquerors. Odin's wisdom came from sacrifice, Thor's power from unending war. In that cosmic order, to dominate was divine. A woman taken in battle was not considered defiled, but reclaimed, folded into the victor's fate like a conquered land. She might be renamed, given new garments, even seated at feasts, not as a guest, but as a symbol of power. Every smile she forced was another victory for the men who believed they had mastered fate. The sagas rarely told what became of these women in the long winters that followed. But through the fragments left by chroniclers, by monks who watched from afar, by traders who whispered in fear, a pattern emerges. Many of the conquered wives became caretakers of their captors' children, and in that silent role, they shaped the next generation of raiders. Their songs, once lullabies of distant lands, became woven into the bloodlines of their enemies. The Norse called it fate, yet fate, as the old women would whisper by the hearth, had a memory longer than any sword. As months turned to years, some of these women adapted. They learned the rituals, tended the fires, and hid their grief beneath layers of routine. But in the dead of night, when the fjord winds howled like ghosts, the memories returned, faces of slain husbands, the echo of their last battle cry. The Vikings believed the dead feasted in Valhalla. The women left behind feasted only on remembrance. It was that remembrance that became their quiet rebellion. Some began to plant hidden symbols, marks of their people, carved into the wood of doors or etched beneath the foundations of longhouses. To the untrained eye, they were mere patterns. But to those who knew, they were prayers, not for mercy, but for vengeance. The sagas never mention these secret languages, but archaeologists have found signs that tell their silent story, household carvings that don't belong to Norse hands, symbols that defy Viking design. The conquered had found a way to endure by embedding their spirit into the world of their oppressors. In time, certain legends arose, tales the Vikings would whisper during storms. When lightning lit the sky and thunder rolled over the mountains, they spoke of the ghost wives, women of foreign blood, who walked the night. Their faces veiled, their voices like the sea's whisper. Superstition or guilt, no one could say. But deep down, even the most hardened jarls feared them. It was said that the gods punished those who took too much, that the spirits of the wronged followed them to the grave. Thus, fear crept into the heart of the Northmen, not fear of battle, but fear of consequence. In this way, the wives of the defeated had achieved what armies could not. They haunted the conscience of the conquerors. Each warrior who gazed into the fire, after a raid, wondered if the faces dancing in the flames were those of the dead, or of the living they had condemned to silence. As years passed, some of these women rose beyond servitude. They learned the Norse way, not to worship it, but to weaponize it. They studied the sagas, memorized the rituals, and became part of the very structure that once enslaved them. A few even earned respect, as healers, priestesses, or cunning wives of chieftains who never knew their true lineage. Through patience, they turned their pain into quiet power. The saga of one such woman, a name lost to time, tells of how she became seer to a powerful jarl. To his men, she was a prophetess. To herself, she was a spy for the dead. In secret, she would whisper to the wind in a tongue older than Norse, sending messages to the gods of her people. The jarl prospered, but his dreams were haunted by shadows he could not understand. When he died suddenly one winter night, his last words were a plea to a goddess no Viking had ever named. And so, the cycle turned. The conquerors became haunted by the conquered, not through blade or battle, but through the slow erosion of their legacy. For every longhouse built on the ashes of another, the spirit of that other still remained invisible, enduring, impatient, because history is not just written by the victors, it is whispered by those who survived them. They thought they could erase the past with fire and iron, but the past has a way of speaking, even through ashes. Centuries after the age of the Vikings faded into legend, the echoes of those lost voices still lingered in the sagas. Archaeologists would uncover amulets carved with runes that no one could quite translate, strange sigils that spoke not of gods or glory, but of endurance. They were the signatures of survivors. While kings and jarls fought for their fleeting empires, it was the silent ones, the widows, the servants, the forgotten who carried memory forward like embers smuggled through the dark. In the long winters of the north, these women became storytellers. Around hearths that once belonged to their enemies, they told tales of balance, that no victory is eternal, that the strong must one day answer for the tears of the weak. Their words softened with time, disguised as folklore, but their meaning endured. Even the Vikings themselves began to change. By the later centuries, as trade replaced raiding, The same society that once glorified conquest began to honor women as keepers of wisdom, as skalds, as shield maidens of the spirit. In quiet, almost unseen ways, the conquered had remade the conquerors. When Christianity finally reached the northern the monks who chronicled Norse conversion found villages already whispering of mercy, of fate bending toward justice. They didn't know that the seeds of that change were planted long before, by those who refused to forget. The sagas of Odin and Thor survived, but hidden beneath them were the older voices, speaking in dreams, reminding the Northmen that no empire, no warband, no god of thunder could silence the human will to endure. And so the story closes not with the clang of swords, but with the whisper of legacy. The Vikings won their wars, but those they conquered won the centuries. The spirit of every broken hearth became part of the northern soul, shaping the myths we still tell today. What was once cruelty became cautionary. What was once silence became song. Because history, no matter how grim, belongs to those who remember. If you've felt the chill of this forgotten past, make sure to subscribe to The Hidden History, where every legend has a darker truth waiting to be uncovered.